For more than a century, every freight train in America ended the same way, with a red caboose, full of people whose job was to keep the train from killing someone. By 1980, more than 10,000 of them were still in service. Rolling offices at the tail end of mile-long steel serpents, each one manned by crew members, watching for the mechanical failures that could derail a train or incinerate a town. Then, in less than 10 years, they vanished. Not slowly, not gradually, almost all at once. And it was not because of computers or automation the way you think. The real reason is a $500 box, so small it fit in a backpack that rail unions called a toy. And it turned out to be better at keeping trains safe than the people it replaced. So what was this device? And why did something so cheap destroy an icon that had survived world wars, the Great Depression, and 100 years of technological change? To understand what killed the caboose, you first need to understand what it actually did. Because the caboose was not nostalgia. It was a safety-critical system. Inside every caboose sat at least one crew member, usually a conductor and a brakeman, whose job was deceptively simple. Their task was to watch the train. They stared out windows in the cupola, scanning the line of freight cars ahead for problems that could turn catastrophic in seconds. A wheel bearing overheating to 600 degrees, glowing cherry red in the darkness. A coupler cracking under tension, about to snap and send 20 tons of steel careening off the rails. An air brake hose rupturing, bleeding the pressure that keeps 100 loaded cars from becoming an uncontrolled avalanche of metal. These weren't theoretical dangers. In 1978 alone, the Federal Railroad Administration recorded over 3,000 incidents directly related to mechanical failures that caboose crews were trained to spot. Hot box detectors, stationary sensors along the track, existed, but they were sparse, sometimes 50 miles apart. A bearing could seize, ignite its lubrication, and set a boxcar ablaze long before the train reached the next detector. The caboose crew was the last line of defense. They carried tools, spare parts, and emergency flares. When something went wrong miles from help, they had to fix it or signal for it. They were also the ones who walked the train during stops, checking every coupling, every brake shoe, and every wheel for cracks. But by the late 1970s, railroads were suffocating under pressure that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with survival. Freight trains were getting longer, often exceeding 100 cars, and profit margins were collapsing. The Staggers Rail Act of 1980 deregulated the industry, forcing railroads to compete on price. Every unnecessary cost became a target, and the caboose was starting to look very unnecessary to the accountants. Running the numbers. Here is what those numbers looked like. A caboose was not just a red box on wheels. It was a mobile liability costing railroads a fortune they could not afford anymore. Start with the crew. A typical freight run required 3 people, an engineer in the locomotive, a conductor, and a rear brakeman in the caboose. At 1980 wages, that rear crew cost over $100 per hour in labor alone. Multiply that across thousands of daily freight runs, and you are burning millions annually on wages for people whose primary job was to look out a window. Then add the caboose itself. Each unit weighed 25 to 30 tons. Hauling that dead weight for thousands of miles burned extra fuel, diesel that cost real money when oil prices spiked in the 1970s. Maintenance was constant. Wheels wore out, brake systems needed servicing. Interiors deteriorated from weather and use. Replacing or rehabilitating a single caboose ran $40,000 to $60,000. And here is the hidden cost nobody talked about: operational delay. Freight trains were assembled in classification yards, where cars were sorted and coupled into outbound consists. Every train needed a caboose attached at the end. But cabooses were often in the wrong place, parked on a siding, awaiting repairs, or simply lost in the chaos of a massive yard. Finding and coupling a caboose could delay departure by 30 minutes or more. In an industry where time was literally money, that was unacceptable. Railroad executives saw the math clearly. The caboose was costing them roughly $15 per train mile when you factored in labor, fuel drag, maintenance, and delays. On a run of 1,000 miles, that is $15,000. Run 10 trains a day, and you are bleeding $150,000 a day on a single route. But they couldn't just remove it. Federal regulations required a caboose. It was written into the rules, backed by decades of precedent and ferociously defended by unions who understood what eliminating the caboose really meant: eliminating jobs. So railroads needed an alternative, not just something cheaper, something that could do the caboose's critical job better than humans could. And that's when the engineers showed up with a device the size of a lunchbox. The end-of-train device, called ETD, did not look like much. A metal housing about the size of a car battery, weighing maybe 20 pounds, that clamped magnetically to the rear coupler of the last freight car. No windows, no crew, no coffee pot, or bunk bed. But inside that box was something the caboose could never offer: relentless precision. The ETD had one job: monitor the air pressure in the train's brake line. That might sound mundane, but it was everything. A freight train's brakes work on compressed air pumped from the locomotive through a single continuous hose running the length of the train. If that pressure drops, whether from a break in the line, a coupling failure, or a slow leak, the train loses its ability to stop. On a fully loaded freight train weighing 10,000 tons, that pressure drop is the difference between controlled deceleration and catastrophe. Caboose crews monitored this by feel and by watching a pressure gauge inside the caboose. If something felt wrong, a sudden lurch or an unexpected slowdown, they would check the gauge and radio the engineer. But felt wrong is subjective. Gauges could stick. Crew members got distracted, tired, or simply did not notice a gradual pressure bleed until it was too late. The ETD never blinked. It sampled brake line pressure every second and transmitted that data by radio directly to a display unit in the locomotive cab. If pressure dropped below a critical threshold, for example from the standard 90 pounds per square inch down to 75, the device screamed an alarm to the engineer instantly. And if radio contact was lost, the ETD automatically triggered an emergency brake application, stopping the train. It was faster, more accurate, and more reliable than any human, and it cost $500. Not $500 per mile, not $500 per year, $500 total, one-time purchase. No salary, no benefits, no fatigue. When Pulse Electronics introduced the first commercial end-of-train device, known as the ETD, in 1982, rail executives saw deliverance. Union leaders saw a threat. And both were right. But there was a problem. Nobody trusted it yet. The United Transportation Union did not mince words. The union called the device a toy that would get people killed. Their argument was not entirely wrong. Early end-of-train devices had issues. Radio transmission could be blocked by terrain or interference. Batteries died. Mounting clamps occasionally failed. A $500 device bouncing off the train at 60 miles per hour was not doing anyone any good. But beneath the technical objections was existential terror. Thousands of conductors and brakemen understood what the ETD represented: obsolescence. If a cheap box could replace the safety function of the caboose, then the caboose itself and the jobs inside it were finished. The unions fought back hard. Strikes erupted. Lawsuits were filed. The United Transportation Union lobbied Congress and state legislatures, arguing that removing human oversight from freight trains was reckless cost-cutting that prioritized profit over safety. In some states, they succeeded. Laws were passed mandating cabooses or minimum crew sizes, creating a patchwork of regulations that varied by jurisdiction. Meanwhile, railroads quietly ran parallel tests. They equipped trains with both cabooses and end-of-train devices, comparing performance in real-world conditions. The results were undeniable and devastating to the union's case. End-of-train devices never got tired on the 15th hour of a shift. They never missed a 2-pound per square inch pressure drop while a conductor poured coffee. They did not require bathroom breaks or shift changes. When the data came back, incident rates on trains equipped with end-of-train devices were lower than on trains with only cabooses, not slightly lower, measurably, statistically lower. By 1985, railroads had compiled thousands of operational hours, proving the end-of-train device was not only safe, it was safer. The device detected brake line failures faster than humans, often before a problem became visible. It could not spot a hot bearing visually, but railroads had already been installing wayside hot box detectors that did that job better anyway. The unions were losing the argument on their own terms. They had claimed the end-of-train device was unsafe. The data said the opposite, and then the regulators made their decision. In 1988, the Federal Railroad Administration issued a rule that changed everything. Cabooses were no longer required on most freight trains, provided the trains were equipped with a functioning end-of-train device. The floodgates opened. Within 18 months, nearly every major railroad in America had stripped cabooses from regular service. Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, CSX, and Norfolk Southern all moved at once. By 1990, an estimated 98% of cabooses were gone. Some were sold to collectors or converted into trackside offices. Most were scrapped for parts or left to rust on forgotten sidings. The math was too brutal to resist. A railroad running 100 trains a day could eliminate 300 caboose crew positions, saving $30 million annually in labor costs alone. Add in fuel savings, maintenance elimination, and operational efficiency, and the total ran north of $50 million per year for a mid-sized railroad. Jobs vanished with the cabooses. By 1992, over 40,000 railroad workers had been furloughed or reassigned. Entire towns built around rail employment, places where being a conductor was a multi-generational family tradition, watched their economies collapse. But the trains kept running, faster, longer, and cheaper than before. And the ETD devices kept working. The irony is almost cruel. The caboose survived a century of technological change. The transition from steam to diesel, the advent of automatic couplers, the introduction of air brakes. It outlasted economic depressions and 2 world wars. It became an American icon, immortalized in children's books and model train sets. It was killed in less than a decade by a device that cost less than a good suit. The caboose did not die because of vague automation or faceless computers replacing people. It died because a single-purpose device outperformed humans at the exact task that justified their presence. Not by being smarter, not by being more versatile, but by being relentlessly, inhumanly consistent at one specific job. That is the lesson nobody wants to hear. Progress does not always arrive as a sophisticated robot or an advanced AI system. Sometimes it shows up as a $500 box clipped to the end of a train, doing one thing well enough that tradition becomes unaffordable. The caboose is history now, but the pattern is not. Somewhere right now, there is another profession, another icon, another thing people assume will always be there, because it always has been. And somewhere, an engineer is building the box that will replace it. How much do you think that one will cost?